I died on a cold operating table while my husband held his first love's hand in the ward next door. When I opened my eyes, I was back on the day he begged for a divorce. This time, I smiled, signed the papers, and watched him walk straight into hell. The memory of dying is not something that fades. It is visceral. It tastes like copper and smells like sterile iodine. I remember the rhythmic, agonizing beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor slowing down. I remember the feeling of my lungs crystallizing the desperate gasp for air that never came. But most of all, I remember the silence of my hospital room. I was dying of multiple organ failure, a direct result of the relentless clandestine procedures I had subjected my body to for 3 years. And where was my husband, Harrison Hayes, the man whose life I had literally bled to save? He was in the VIP suite 3 doors down, holding the hand of Chloe Carmichael. Chloe had suffered a minor panic attack. I was experiencing cardiac arrest. He chose her. He always chose her. The last thing I heard before the darkness swallowed me was the sympathetic whisper of a nurse. "Her husband isn't coming. He said he can't be disturbed." Then a violent jolt. I gasped, my eyes snapping open, as if I had just broken the surface of a freezing lake. My chest heaved. I gripped the edge of a heavy polished oak table. The smell of iodine was gone, replaced by the rich, intoxicating scent of Tom Ford tobacco vanilla and fresh rain hitting floor-to-ceiling glass. I wasn't in the ICU. I was standing in the dining room of our Manhattan penthouse. "Vivian, are you even listening to me?" The voice sent a shockwave of ice down my spine. I looked up. Standing across from me was Harrison. He was looking at me with that familiar mixture of impatience and pity. He was perfectly healthy. His cheeks had color, his posture was arrogant, and his dark hair was impeccably styled. He didn't look like the frail, dying man he had been 3 years ago. He looked like a king, and standing half a step behind him, her fingers delicately curled around the fabric of his sleeve, was Chloe. She had those wide, tear-filled doe eyes, trembling like a leaf in the wind. "I can't do this anymore, Vivian," Harrison said, his jaw tightening. "Chloe has nothing. Her lupus is flaring up, her family cut her off, and she is entirely alone. You have your trust fund, your socialites, your empire. You are strong. She is fragile. I'm moving her into the guest house. If you can't accept that, then I want a divorce." The vertigo hit me. I recognized this exact moment. It was September 14th, 3 years before my death. It was the turning point. In my past life, this was the moment I shattered. I had thrown a crystal vase at the wall. I had dropped to my knees, sobbing, begging him not to humiliate me. I had weaponized my family's wealth, threatening to ruin his company Hayes Industries if he dared to leave me for his childhood sweetheart. I forced him to stay. He submitted, but from that day forward, his heart turned to stone. He grew to despise me, treating me like a warden rather than a wife, all while secretly funneling money to Chloe behind my back. And all the while, I kept quietly checking myself into Dr. Elias Mercer's underground clinic, letting them drill into my hip bones to extract the rare genetically mutated stem cells that were keeping Harrison's undiagnosed autoimmune necrosis at bay. He never knew I was his anonymous donor. He thought his sudden miracle remission was simply good luck. I stared at his handsome, ungrateful face. The sheer audacity of it all was almost comical now. I had literally given him the marrow from my bones, and he was standing here telling me I was too strong to need him. "Vivian!" Harrison snapped, stepping forward, bracing himself for the hysterical screaming he was so sure was coming. "Don't look at me like that. I am not asking for your permission. I am telling you what is going to happen." Chloe let out a soft, calculated whimper. "I'm so sorry, Vivian," I never meant to come between you two. If it's too much trouble, I'll just go sleep on the streets." I slowly stood up straight, smoothing the wrinkles from my silk skirt. The phantom pain of the bone drill in my hip seemed to vanish, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I looked at Harrison, really looked at him, and saw nothing but a parasite dressed in a Brioni suit. "You want a divorce?" My voice was quiet, eerily steady. It didn't tremble. Harrison blinked, caught off guard. I said I want to move her into the guest house. A divorce is the alternative, if you insist on being unreasonable." "No." I smiled softly, walking over to my Hermes Birkin bag on the side table. "Divorce sounds wonderful. In fact, let's not wait. You can have this penthouse. You can have the Hamptons property. I will have my lawyer, Richard Gable, send the papers to your office by tomorrow morning." Silence fell over the room. It was absolute, suffocating silence. Chloe's fake tears instantly dried up her eyes, darting between me and Harrison in sheer confusion. Harrison looked as if I had just slapped him across the face. He opened his mouth, closed it, and stared at me. "What game are you playing, Vivian?" he demanded, his voice dropping an octave, laced with suspicion. "If you think reverse psychology is going to work—" "There's no game, Harrison," I said, slipping my phone and keys into my coat pocket. "You said it yourself. I am strong. I have my empire. You are free to play nursemaid to your fragile first love. I refuse to stand in the way of such a tragic, beautiful romance." I walked toward the front door, the click of my Louboutins echoing sharply on the marble floor. As I gripped the brass doorknob, I paused and looked over my shoulder. "Oh, and Harrison," I said, my eyes locking onto his. "Take good care of your health. Life is incredibly fragile. You never know when your luck might just run out." I didn't wait to see his reaction. I walked out the heavy oak door, clicking shut behind me, severing the tie that had dragged me to my grave. The moment I stepped into the private elevator, I leaned back against the mirrored wall and let out a laugh. It started as a chuckle and erupted into genuine, breathless laughter. I was free. I was alive. And Harrison Hayes had just voluntarily signed his own death warrant. By 8 a.m. the next morning, I was sitting in the mahogany-paneled office of my lead attorney, Richard Gable. Richard was a shark in a bespoke suit, a man who had managed my family's estate for decades. He peered over his reading glasses at the draft of the divorce settlement I had emailed him at 3 a.m. "You're giving him the properties." Richard stated not as a question, but as a heavily disapproved fact. "Vivian, your grandfather would resurrect himself just to fire me if I let you do this. Let him have the bricks and mortar." "Richard," I said, sipping my black coffee, "I don't care about the real estate. What I care about is severing all financial liabilities, uncoupling my trust from Hayes Industries, and liquidating my 30% stake in his company. Quietly. Sell it to his biggest competitor, Arthur Pendleton." Richard lowered the papers, his sharp eyes studying my face. "Pendleton. If you sell your shares to Pendleton, Harrison will lose majority control of his own board within a year. You're not just divorcing him, Vivian. You're pulling the foundation out from under his company." "He asked for his freedom." I smiled thinly. "I'm just giving it to him. Fast-track the papers, Richard. I want this done by Friday." My next stop was far less glamorous, but infinitely more important. Mercer Clinic was hidden behind an unmarked frosted glass door in the basement of a private medical facility in the Upper East Side. Dr. Elias Mercer was a brilliant hematologist with highly flexible morals. When Harrison first collapsed 4 years ago from idiopathic bone marrow necrosis, every top doctor gave him 6 months to live. It was Mercer who discovered that my rare genetic mutation produced a specialized stem cell that could essentially reboot Harrison's failing system. But the cells degraded rapidly. Harrison needed a fresh transfusion every 4 weeks to survive. I walked into Mercer's sterile office unannounced. He looked up from his microscope startled. "Vivian, you aren't scheduled for an extraction for another 2 weeks. You know we can't overdraw your red blood cell count is already—" "Cancel it, Elias," I interrupted, setting my bag on his desk. Dr. Mercer froze, his pen hovering over his notepad. "Cancel the extraction? You mean postpone it?" "I mean terminate the donor agreement entirely, permanently," I said, keeping my voice flat and clinical. "Destroy the remaining frozen samples. From this second forward patient, Harrison Hayes is no longer my responsibility." Mercer stood up, his face paling. "Vivian, you can't be serious. If we stop the transfusions, the necrosis will reawaken. His immune system will start attacking his own marrow again within weeks. Without your specific stem cells, he will experience severe fatigue, neurological tremors, and eventually—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "He'll die," I finished for him, entirely unbothered. "Yes, I am aware of the medical reality, Doctor. Just as I am aware that I was paying you $3 million a year to maintain my anonymity." "I'm his doctor, I took an oath," Mercer protested, though the mention of his exorbitant fee made him sweat. "And you will keep that oath," I countered sharply. "You will treat your patient to the best of your ability. Prescribe him steroids. Put him on the global donor registry. Offer him chemotherapy. Do your job, Elias. But my body is no longer a factory for a man who doesn't even know I'm saving him." I leaned closer, resting my hands on his desk. "If you ever breathe a word to him that I was the anonymous donor, I will have Richard Gable ruin you so completely you won't even be able to get a job as a mall pharmacist. Am I understood?" Mercer swallowed hard, looking at the ice in my eyes. He slowly nodded. "Understood." Over the next month, the high society of Manhattan gorged itself on the scandal. Harrison and I were the golden couple, and our sudden, highly publicized divorce was the talk of every gala. Harrison didn't waste a second. The ink on the settlement wasn't even dry before he began parading Chloe around town. They were photographed at the Met at exclusive charity auctions and dining at Le Bernardin. The narrative Chloe spun was sickeningly sweet, the tragic, destined lovers who finally found their way back to each other, overcoming the cold, controlling ex-wife. I didn't hide. I attended the same events wearing a stunning revenge dress, laughing with investors, and finalizing the sale of my shares to Arthur Pendleton. Whenever Harrison saw me, I caught the deep, unsettled confusion in his eyes. He expected me to be a weeping, withered husk. Instead, I was glowing. My energy had returned, now that I wasn't being medically drained every 30 days. The climax of their honeymoon phase happened at the annual Vanguard Charity Gala. I was standing near the Champagne Tower chatting with the French ambassador when Chloe approached me. Harrison trailed slightly behind her, looking tense. Chloe was wearing a custom white gown, clearly trying to mimic bridal energy. "Vivian," Chloe sighed, projecting her voice just enough for the surrounding socialites to hear. "I just wanted to come over and say thank you. It takes a big person to admit when they've lost. You gave Harrison his freedom, and honestly, I hope you find someone who can love you the way he loves me." The crowd went dead silent, waiting for my reaction. Harrison stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Chloe, don't. Let's just go." I took a slow sip of my vintage Dom Perignon. I looked Chloe up and down from her perfectly coiffed hair to her shaking hands. "Lost." I echoed, my lips curving into a razor-sharp smile. Chloe, darling, you didn't win a prize. You picked up my garbage. But please enjoy the guest house. Chloe flushed scarlet, her eyes welling with immediate, practiced tears. Harrison, she gasped, clutching his arm. Harrison glared at me, his face twisting with rage. You are completely heartless, Vivian. You have no idea what real struggle is. You've never sacrificed anything for anyone. He reached out to grab a glass from a passing waiter's tray to toast his own dramatic exit. But as his fingers wrapped around the crystal stem, something happened. His hand gave a violent, uncontrollable twitch. The champagne flute slipped from his grip, shattering against the marble floor with a loud, ringing crash. Harrison froze, staring down at his right hand. The fingers were trembling, a fine, rapid tremor that he couldn't stop no matter how hard he clenched his fist. I saw the exact moment the annoyance in his eyes shifted to a deep, primal terror. He recognized that tremor. It was the first symptom, the very first sign of the necrosis waking up. He looked up at me, his breathing suddenly shallow. I just smiled, raised my glass in a mock toast, and walked away. The clock had officially started ticking. The tremor at the Vanguard Gala was only the beginning. Within 2 weeks, Harrison's facade of invincible arrogance began to crumble, replaced by the grim grey reality of his failing biology. I didn't have to seek out information about his decline. The whispers of Manhattan's elite brought it right to my doorstep. Harrison had abruptly cancelled a keynote speech in London. He was seen leaving a Michelin-starred restaurant, leaning heavily on his chauffeur. The vibrant, imposing CEO of Hayes Industries was rapidly transforming back into the ghost I had spent 3 agonizing years keeping out of the grave. What nobody knew, except for me and Dr. Elias Mercer, was the sheer, unadulterated panic unfolding behind the closed doors of the Mercer Clinic. My private investigator, a former MI6 operative named Declan Cross, provided me with the delightful audio recordings of Harrison's visits. I listened to them while sipping chamomile tea on my balcony overlooking Central Park. What do you mean they withdrew? Harrison's recorded voice was shrill, entirely stripped of its usual commanding baritone. Offer them double. Offer them 10 million, I don't care what it costs. Elias, find the donor and get them back in that chair. It's not about money, Mr. Hayes. Dr. Mercer's voice was remarkably steady, likely because he was terrified of the ruin I had promised him. The donor's legal counsel was absolute. They have permanently terminated the agreement. The remaining samples were incinerated per their strict instructions. I am putting you on the global registry, but finding a match with that exact synthesized genetic anomaly is mathematically improbable. Improbable. Harrison had screamed, accompanied by the sound of something heavy, likely a medical tray, smashing against a wall. I am Harrison Hayes. I don't do improbable, fix this. But money cannot buy a miracle when the architect of that miracle has locked the door and thrown away the key. As Harrison's physical health spiraled, his professional life followed suit. Selling my 30% stake to Arthur Pendleton was the tactical equivalent of planting a bomb in the foundation of Hayes Industries. Pendleton was a ruthless corporate raider. With my shares combined with a few quiet acquisitions from disgruntled board members, Pendleton executed a hostile takeover with breathtaking speed. On a rainy Tuesday, Harrison was officially ousted as CEO of the company his grandfather had built. The stress of the boardroom coup accelerated his necrosis. According to Declan's reports, Harrison collapsed in the executive elevator immediately after the vote, hemorrhaging from his nose, and had to be quietly rushed to Mount Sinai Hospital. And where was Chloe during this catastrophic fall from grace? She was exactly where I knew she would be looking for the nearest exit. Chloe Carmichael loved the idea of a powerful, wealthy savior. She did not love the reality of a bankrupt, dying man who sweated through his silk sheets and vomited up expensive medications. When Harrison was forced to move out of his luxury properties and into a leased, sterile luxury apartment closer to the hospital, Chloe began spending her days shopping for necessities. Declan's photos, however, showed her having prolonged, intimate lunches with a young hedge fund manager in Tribeca. Harrison was bleeding out financially and physically, and the leech he had thrown me away for was already detaching herself to find a fresh host. I, on the other hand, had never felt more alive. My immune system, no longer compromised by constant marrow extraction, bounced back with a vengeance. My skin glowed. I launched a new venture capital firm focusing strictly on biotech startups. I was photographed on the cover of Forbes, hailed as the shrewd, unsentimental queen of Manhattan real estate and venture capital. The contrast between us was a masterclass in karma. I was ascending to the sun, and he was burying himself in the dirt. But the true climax of my rebirth was yet to come. Harrison still didn't know why his anonymous donor had vanished so abruptly. He was a desperate man, and desperate men ask dangerous questions. He hired his own team of aggressive corporate fixers to hack into Mercer Clinic's encrypted server to find the identity of the donor. It took them 3 months. It happened on a Thursday evening in late November. I was sitting in my study reviewing a term sheet when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Declan Cross. They cracked Mercer's firewall. He has the file. I slowly set my phone face down on the mahogany desk. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling a savage thrill rush through my veins. The trap had finally snapped shut. I knew he would come. It wasn't a matter of if, but when. The storm raging outside my penthouse windows was dramatic sheets of icy rain lashing against the glass, reflecting the turbulent lights of the city below. The security buzzer chimed at 11 p.m. The concierge's voice sounded tense through the intercom. "Ms. Vivian, I apologize for the late disturbance, but your ex-husband, Mr. Hayes, is in the lobby. He is not looking well, ma'am. He's demanding to see you. Should I call the authorities?" "No," I replied smoothly, adjusting the collar of my emerald silk robe. "Send him up." The elevator doors chimed open a minute later. I stood in the center of my vast, dimly lit living room, waiting. When Harrison stumbled into my penthouse, I almost didn't recognize him. The tailored Brioni suits were gone, replaced by a heavy, rain-soaked trench coat that hung off his skeletal frame like a shroud. His skin was a translucent, waxy gray, heavily bruised around the eyes. His hair had thinned dramatically, and he was leaning his entire body weight on a silver-tipped cane. He looked like a corpse that had somehow dragged itself out of a morgue. In his trembling left hand, he clutched a crumpled manila folder. He stopped a few feet away from me, panting heavily, his sunken eyes locked onto my face. For a long, suffocating moment, the only sound in the room was the heavy drumming of the rain and the rattling, wet wheeze of his breathing. "You!" he croaked, his voice cracking, broken. "It was you." He dropped the manila folder onto the floor. Several papers spilled out, along with a high-resolution photograph of me lying unconscious in Mercer's underground clinic tubes, snaking from my hip. I looked down at the photo, then back up at him. My expression didn't shift. "You look terrible, Harrison. You really should be resting." His knees buckled. He didn't just fall. He collapsed onto the hardwood floor, landing hard, gasping for breath. He looked up at me from the ground, tears cutting clean paths through the grime and sweat on his face. 3 years, he sobbed, clutching at his chest. 3 years you let them drill into your bones. You gave me your marrow, your blood. Yes, I said, my voice as cold and hard as a diamond. Every 4 weeks. I endured agony so you could play the arrogant, invincible Titan. And what did you do with the life I gave you? Harrison, oh. I slowly walked toward him, the soft whisper of my silk robe, the only sound over his weeping. I stood above him, looking down at the man who had destroyed me in another life. You brought another woman into my home. I continued my words, striking him like physical blows. You told me I was too strong to need you. You told me I had never sacrificed anything for anyone. I didn't know, he wailed, reaching out with a shaking hand to grab the hem of my robe. I took a deliberate step back, out of his reach. Vivian, please God, I didn't know. If I had known, I never would have looked at Chloe. I never would have asked for the divorce. You were saving me. You were my angel. Don't flatter yourself, I sneered, feeling a surge of pure, venomous disgust. You didn't leave me because you thought I was strong. You left me because you are fundamentally selfish. You wanted the thrill of a fragile damsel to stoke your massive ego. Well, you got her. Where is she now, Harrison? He flinched, a fresh sob tearing from his throat. We both knew the answer. Chloe had packed her designer bags and vanished to Monaco with her new banker 3 days ago. She left me, he whispered, burying his face in his trembling hands. I have nothing. Arthur took the company. My accounts are frozen. The pain... Vivian, the pain in my bones is like fire. I'm dying. I have weeks left, maybe less. He looked up, his eyes wide, feral, and utterly desperate. He crawled toward me, pressing his forehead against my shoes, completely abandoning whatever shreds of dignity he had left. Please, he begged, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine. Please, Vivian, just one more extraction. Mercer says if we do it now, it can stabilize me. I'll give you everything I have left. I'll sign my life over to you. I'll be your slave. Just don't let me die. Please, I love you. I realize now I've always loved you. The sheer audacity of it almost made me laugh. He was dying exactly as I had died, on that cold operating table in my past life, alone, terrified and betrayed. I crouched down, bringing my face level with his. I reached out my perfectly manicured fingers, gently lifting his chin so he was forced to look into my eyes. Love, I whispered softly. You don't know the meaning of the word. You love the fact that I am the only medicine on earth that can cure you. I let go of his chin and stood back up to my full height. There will be no more extractions, Harrison. My donor agreement is permanently terminated. You made your choice that day in the dining room. You chose Chloe. You chose your freedom. No, he screamed, coughing violently, specks of blood hitting the polished wood floor. You can't do this. You're my wife. You took a vow to save me. I took a vow to a man who died 3 years ago, I said, turning my back on him. The man writhing on my floor is a stranger, and I do not bleed for strangers. I walked toward the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. Over my shoulder, I delivered the final, fatal blow. My concierge will escort you out. I suggest you go back to the hospital. Harrison. Spend your final days making peace with whatever God will have you, because I am done with you. I didn't look back as the heavy oak doors opened and 2 burly security guards hoisted his screaming, sobbing, thrashing body off the floor, dragging him toward the elevator. His pleas echoed down the hallway until the doors finally slid shut, cutting him off completely. Silence descended upon the penthouse once again. The rich, intoxicating scent of rain and my expensive perfume filled the air. 2 weeks later, on a crisp Tuesday morning, Richard Gable called me with the news. Harrison Hayes had passed away at 3:14 a.m. in a public ward alone. His body simply gave out. There was no grand funeral, no weeping widow, just a quiet, miserable end to a pathetic existence. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, looking out over the sprawling empire of Manhattan. The sun was rising, casting a brilliant golden light over the city. In my first life, I died in the dark, so he could live in the light. In this life, I let him burn, and as I raised my coffee cup to the morning sun, taking a deep, satisfying breath of crisp air, I finally smiled. Rebirth was a beautiful thing, and that is how Vivian rewrote her destiny from a tragic casualty to the undisputed queen of her own empire. Harrison thought he held all the power, but he learned the hard way that you never discard your lifeline. If you loved watching Vivian serve the ultimate ice-cold karma smash, that like button and share this story, what would you have done in her shoes? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more savage rebirth stories.